Welcome to The World in a Pickle, a special mini-series of Ferment Radio. My name is Aga Pokrywka, your fermentation wizardess, storyteller, and host of this episode. Since time immemorial, fermented foods have been a paradigm of preservation, but most of all, of everlasting transformation. The World in a Pickle focuses on fermented foods from different parts of the world to understand our current geopolitical complexities, from Mexico to Ukraine and from Brazil to Palestine. The World in a Pickle brings stories that ferment hope in the middle of trouble. Episode 3: The End of Many Worlds. Any attempt of telling of their story will inevitably be partial and incomplete. They are the Guarani-Kaiowá, an indigenous people of what today is Paraguay, northeastern Argentina, and Mato Grosso do Sul, a state in Brazil's central west region. The Guarani-Kaiowá say their ancestors spent centuries searching for the land without evil, a place where they could thrive and belong to. They finally found it in what we know as Mato Grosso do Sul, which literally translates from Portuguese as thick forest of the south. For centuries, they lived in harmony among the generosity of trees, rivers, seasons, animals, and microbes. To this day, they sing sacred chants to tune in with the spirits as well. In the 1500s, soon after the Portuguese arrived, over 90% of Brazil's indigenous were wiped out by smallpox and influenza. Additionally, violence, enslavement, and forced displacement further contributed to the decline of indigenous communities. However, the Guarani-Kaiowá were spared. Their dense forests protected them, allowing them to continue fishing in the waters, hunting in the forests, planting the earth, and fermenting the sacred white corn drink, chicha. You might have heard this name before. White corn is the nucleus of the Guarani-Kaiowá existence and their way of life. The ritual of making chicha is not only a way of preserving the sacred white corn, it is also a way to preserve their culture. Therefore, cultivating corn, having rituals with it, and drinking chicha is the very core of the Guarani-Kaiowá survival. They believe that if they no longer work the land to harvest their crops, and if they stop making chicha, the world will end. So what does the end of their world look like? What does the end of our world look like? Before answering these questions, let's have a closer look on chicha. What is it exactly? I asked that question to Paula Neubauer, a Brazilian award-winning chef and educator based in Somerset, Great Britain.
Chicha is a corn, a white local corn, ground corn, like a polenta that you make a meal out of it. Then it's cooked on a fire over time. No sugar is done. They actually add some sweet potato powder to have some available sugars there to help out in the fermentation. And after this gruel is cooked on an open fire, on a coal fire, like we've done for about an hour, the elder, she said, like, I can smell it when it's ready. So then when it's done, when it's good, when it gets to like, when it's cooked, when it's deemed cooked enough by the elder, then she will process it by incorporating salivation into it. And then this is either going to be consumed right then and there when they call it chicha, or, and how she explains, if you have enough to feed, because this is especially the special corn, the white corn is done a specific time of the year. And then they would then bring the salivation, let it ferment, because the amylase is breaking down. You breaking down into available sugars, which then the environmental yeasts on that place is going to be able to access, and then it's going to start ferment and become alcoholic over time. And about 2 weeks is what they give it, and that's when it's consumed for intoxicating, uh, you know, intoxicating purposes. Before that, it's more like a ritualistic that everyone calls, and is considered not just a delicacy, but is a very symbolic for them, because the white corn is the symbol of the community. So by eating it, by consuming, by preserving it, by bringing it back, you're celebrating the Guarani people, at the soul, the Guarani people itself. So I think this is where it really differs from how shisha is seen or consumed in a lot of Central American and South American countries, which is more like just a drink, a fermented drink, or a corn beer. It has a very ritualistic meaning. The white corn is the signifier for them, for their people, for their existence. So much so that they say that the moment the white corn doesn't grow anymore in Guarani land, in their land, it means it's the apocalypse for them. So this whole ritual, and it's the women that they are the ones who prepared and farm the corn. The men prepare the land, but are the women that they farm, they harvest, and they prepare the drink. So this is a big important part of innately their culture, and innately the role of the Neanderthals and the roles of the women, because it's connected. Women are the holders of the body. We give birth, we feed, and the corn is the food. So it's part of it's inherently part of the female existence to be tending of the corn, because they're the food of the spirit and the food of Nyanderu. So it's the women that have to inhabit the space of making it, of growing it. And there is a lot of also rituals involved within the white corn from growth, because she was telling me there's a singing, a prayer, a heza, for when they grow the corn, and there is certain rituals that if there's a wind, they have to go and do something to the corn. There's a few, but there are all the stages that they have to do to tend while tending to the corn while it grows, and how they harvest. And more importantly, the baptism of the corn. Once the corn is harvested, they have this ritual that is 7-day a 7-day baptism, and you have the 24 hours ritual that they sing while they're cooking it. Then someone always standing to the corn and always singing to the corn, and they call the baptism of the corn. And some of this corn is going to be kept for a harvest for the next year, and some is going to be treated and be done for the drink, for the shisha, for the big communal drink ceremony. Less and less is that corn is becoming kawin, is becoming the alcohol drink, because there's not enough. You would only then make it into alcohol with that sacred corn if you had enough to go around on that meal that they share, and then we'll let go into alcohol after.
This is the process that Paola witnessed while visiting the remote village of Guiracambiu. It was led by two Nyandesi, Adelina Ramone Nueza Confianza and Jansira, with help from Dani for the translation. Only 3 villages around there make shisha in similar way.
Doing this project with that webinar with the fermentation school, and I had the unique opportunity of having access to 2 Nyandesis. They are almost in their 90s, so they are of a completely different generation. And they got the chance to break down to me that is actually shisha is the first stage of fermentation, that once it gets alcoholic, it's called kawin. this is one visit I did to this community, which is called Guarani-Kaiowá, which is a retomada village, what we call a retaking village. So it was for me incredible being able to access this community and this time of the year, because they have the sacred corn comes one time a year, and it's generally in March. That's when they have because of course that is their autumn. That's when you get into autumn in Brazil, and then they have this a festivities called Pickle, which is the baptism of the corn. So for 7 days they keep baptizing the corn, and this is the sacred corn, which is going to be used for that. What they say is that this specific corn then is treated this way, should be treated this way.
What is the atmosphere during shisha making, the one you experienced?
It's incredible. It's really beautiful. It has a stillness and a level of concentration. It feels very humbling being there in the company of those ladies there. But you can see that they really inhabit the moment. They're really present, and it's beautiful because it's like the shisha is talking to them. And it was the first time, and it's quite beautiful because I felt it a little bit the first time I did, even though I did the the sweet potato the year before. I just done it with them, and there I got involved. And they have a way of processing with their hands, and you don't speak, but you're doing that. You're doing, and then I got a message from them saying that they had a really good shisha after that one. So I obviously there's this microbial and energetic exchange that was amazing. Whereas this time, because we was with the sacred corn, the Andes dealt with it. I didn't touch any of the objects or any of the corn. I let them inhabit, and because it's quite precious for them as well, they don't have that much white corn, and especially last year they had a drought, so they didn't have too much white corn, so they processed it. The energy of them sharing, it felt really like a really unique, special situation to be.
How Guarani-Kaiowá feel about sharing their knowledge about chicha making?
When I first started my research, when I went to Manaus, to the Amazon, I engaged with some communities there and to try to guess. And some of them did not want to share the knowledge. No, not at all. They're like, look, no, thank you for being interested. I drank the drinks. I went. They have this, and it's amazing. There is this lovely restaurant in Manaus, which is the first. It's by this indigenous chef, and it's all indigenous food. And I started engaging, and she's finishing her PhD in anthropology as well. So we're talking about this access to knowledge, and it's always like what the community wants from it. And I could understand as well why they were wary about sharing, because to have an idea, the name Kawin, which is an ancestral Brazilian drink, has been trademarked by a big conglomerate in Brazil. So I have a friend who's making Kawin, but he cannot do with the traditional spelling. It has to be different. So yes, I think they learned like, but on the other hand, with the Guarani-Kaiowá, I think the message was because they are so aware of the precarity of their situation, they want to share it as a way of documenting and creating awareness. I wanted to make sure that if they were giving us that knowledge, any monies, any assets they came would be reverted to the community, and not, it's not me presenting their technique. I'm not hosting anything. It's them sharing the knowledge. I'm just um, helping them get their voices and their knowledge heard.
Since they are aware that their world is coming to an end, they want to preserve their knowledge by sharing it. So, what does the end of their world look like? Well, just like the end of our world, the whole world, yours and mine, theirs and ours. Exploitation. As global demand for soy, beef, sugar, and tea grew, colonizers have pushed deeper into indigenous lands by cutting forests and poisoning rivers. The home of the Guarani-Kaiowá, once the thick forest of the south, has become an endless monocrop plantation. Agribusiness dominates Brazil's economy, with soy alone generating $47 billion last year, surpassing the US as the world's largest producer. Most of the soy is exported to powerful countries as China, the US, and Argentina as animal feed. The intense drive of land has not only led to mass deforestation, but also the widespread use of genetically modified crops and pesticides. Even after being evicted from their own lands, many Guarani-Kaiowá have no choice but to work for the very landowners who stole their territory. Underpaid and unprotected, they labor in dangerous conditions.
They are so in danger, and they're such on the frontier, on the front line of massive agriculture practices with soya and beans, that they are their culture, their health, their body, their way of being, how they embody the fermentation is really on the brink of extinction. But I'm really committed to do this work with them, and especially with the Yandesis, which are the female elders who are the guardians of this tradition, which is unfortunately very in the fast track of dying. The harvests are being smaller and smaller, and the fact that they are in retomada land, so this is land that is being retaken from agricultural uses, but they are actually, like, if depending on who you see, illegal encampments of indigenous people, because should be private land. They're not the demarcated reserves. So they're and the problem is, I think when they went there, they were expecting the corn to grow as it used to grow before, but because this land is being depleted by agricultural means or cattle growing, they're not getting the yield they were expecting. When she said when they moved back to that land in the 90s, they never got the yield back that they expected to have. And once you go around, and this is like something that is parallel to why they are so in danger, is that this land, Mato Grosso do Sul, and where they are is in the forefront of massive growth soya plantations. And it's, when I say massive, it's massive. It's like driving 5 hours without seeing a soul. Silos the size of Empire State Building. It's just it's sad. It's one of the saddest views. And I never seen that, even coming from São Paulo, and we have a lot of agriculture. I never really quite encountered those scales of agriculture and the scale of usage, intense usage of land that is going on there. This is the biggest exporter, Brazilian exporters. Just last year alone, it contributed $47 billion to the Brazilian economy. And it's been going that for the last 20 years. So independent of which government is there, there's such a massive power. The soy has been ongoing for the last 20 years, since the early 2000s. But before that, since the 70s, was a great area for cattle farming. In the last 30 years, it's been an intense use of pesticides that are even banned in the EU to do that. They have like 3 crops a year on that, and of soya. And what they say is like, oh, we are not monocrops. We have another crop, and it's corn. So it's like intense use of the land, intensive use of water. So I think even if when they do get the space to claim for land, the Guarani-Kaiowá are trying to use land that is being completely depleted by this kind of farming. And this is what they call it, and the UN calls it, is ecocide, because you're not killing directly, but you're killing all the environment necessary for those communities to survive. They cannot grow the stuff that defines them. And then going back to the corn. So if they not grow the corn, it's the end of their culture for them, in their mentality, in their cosmology.
Do you think that global popularization of vegan diet contributes to this situation?
No, this is not, because to be honest, it's well documented that like the bulk of the soya growth goes into animal feed. I was looking at the numbers. I think China is our biggest importer, followed by the States, followed by Argentina.
legal injustice. By 1964, when the military dictatorship took over, Brazil's indigenous peoples were facing annihilation. The government intensified colonization efforts, legalizing the murder of indigenous people through judicial impunity. Even after democracy returned in 1985, progress was painfully slow. The 1988 Constitution recognized indigenous peoples as human beings for the first time and promised to demarcate all indigenous lands with 5 years. Yet, more than 30 years later, less than half of those lands have been officially recognized.
I think there is an intrinsic distrust of any governmental or official figures there as well. And so, I think it happens all throughout marginalized communities, but that's what they say is like the government have been failing them for the last 500 years. It's not just now, and there's been a sham of a law being brought over that I don't know if you ever heard about. It's called Marco Temporal. So basically, what they put through the Congress is saying a law saying that no one can claim ancestral rights of lands after 1988 Constitution. If you haven't been given ancestral rights, then and when they are, because we had a Brazilian Constitution, the latest, because we had the military dictatorship, was in 1988. So they're saying that no claims for ancestral land can be deemed can be seen if it hasn't been done by then, which is ridiculous. So it's kind of like as if your ancestral rights simply and so this is being passed into law recently in Brazil.
Displacement. For centuries, the Guarani-Kaiowá have lived together with their land. This harmony was shattered when colonization reached their region. The March to the West, a government-led initiative in the 20th century, displaced indigenous peoples across Brazil, including the Guarani-Kaiowá. The military dictatorship of the 1960s further intensified this forced displacement. Many of them now live in overcrowded, infertile reserves, or in makeshift shelters along highways where they have no access to electricity, clean water, healthcare, or place to hunt, plant, and live in peace. Today, the Guarani-Kaiowá are the third largest indigenous group in Brazil, yet they occupy only 2.5% of their original territory.
And I keep going back to this idea that we lost the perfect conditions where fermentation makes sense on everyday life. We don't live with seasonality. We don't live with the microbes. We don't understand the convenience of the supermarket. It detached us with the rhythms where fermentation was all part of one thing. It's not something to be learned, it was as part of your day-to-day life as brushing your teeth or doing stuff, because it was just something you did to survive. And I think looking at the Guarani-Kaiowá is how all those aspects are being taken out of them. And that's why this fermentation is not making sense for them, because you don't have someone to pass it on. You don't have the natural inputs and supplies that you need to make them. You don't have the communal living which they live to celebrate that. And I think this is one of the main lessons, is how for fermentation to survive, to make sense, the environment have to make sense as well. You can tell people like, oh, this is good for your gut, but then it's not an intrinsic way of why fermentation. It's just one little aspect of a much bigger picture.
Violence. Some of the Guarani-Kaiowá decide to reclaim their ancestral land, but landowners strike back with rubber bullets, fires, and systematic assassinations of their leaders. The Brazilian authorities turn a blind eye to it, as many politicians and their immediate relatives own land that overlaps with indigenous territories themselves, totaling 96,000 hectares. This is 9 times the size of Paris.
To have an idea, the guy who is the biggest producer of soya in the whole of Brazil, he was he was the minister for agriculture in the last term for Bolsonaro. So imagine how much. Yeah, so that it's the eye of the storm, and I think it's something really complicated there. How we see.
Ideological extremism. As agribusiness expands, so do evangelical churches in the region. More extreme evangelicals view the work of Guarani shamans as sorcery or the devil's work. This has led to the burning of sacred houses and killings.
No, I think this being another really complicated issue because there is being this rise of, in Brazil, born again Christianity. Born again, so we call it evangelical churches. And it's extremely connected with this push to the interior. And what happens is that this also has a very big impact because those, especially the most extreme of those churches, I can't generalize and say every born again Christian is, it's not, but they see the more traditional sides of Guarani-Kaiowá culture as demonic, as satanic, and they are extremely violent. Recently, in the last few years, we had the burning of a few sacred houses, which we call agabsi, which is like the central beating heart of those communities. And in the last year, more tragically, we had the two elders being burned together with their sacred house. And the demonizing of the Nyandesis because the role of the Nyandesi, you have in traditional Guarani-Kaiowá cultures, you have the pajé, the cacique, which is the cacique, which is the head of the family structure, and then you have the two shamans, and they're usually a couple, the Nyandesi and Nyanderu. And the Nyandesis and the Nyanderu, the Nyandesis, they practice healing, and with traditional healing, herbal, but also by prayer and by rituals and prayers and cleansings. And of course, this is seen as it's satanized, anything, and then they become witches. Like that old age word to demonize women throughout the ages. And these areas, they have a lot of alcohol problems and violence towards women, and because they are the matriarchs, they get involved into these actions, and then they use witches as demonizing because of course they are creating that network to protect women.
Silent genocide. Without their land, the Guarani-Kaiowá have lost the ability to practice their traditional ways of life. This destruction has led to the collapse of social structures and deep psychological distress. Many feel sad, insecure, unstable, scared, hungry, and miserable. Many turn to alcohol. Their suicide rate is 34 times higher than the national average, one of the highest rates in the world.
And I think one of the issues with the Guarani-Kaiowá that I should have highlighted is that the younger generation we have a serious problem of suicide rate and violence amongst younger generation within the community. And there's a lack, because I think this exactly, you see so much what is the end game. You see so much lack of possibilities that the younger generations are feeling really depressed and not engaging with the elders who keep on doing it. And I think this is a way of creating an interest and maybe showing that I think the elders are taking this opportunity and say, look, this is important from a community. If let's get more and more people involved, even if it's not our own community, but we need to celebrate, because otherwise this knowledge will die. Just on that group of elders, they lost so many sons and grandsons to violence, to cancer, which is another health issues is going on there, because of course the intensity of pesticides and stuff that is doing, of course, it's petering down into people's body, and the level, I think the number of cancer cases there, even on the white population, is 3 times than the normal Brazilian population.
The Guarani-Kaiowá feel voiceless. Their lands are stolen, their culture is criminalized, their leaders are assassinated, and their future is uncertain. And this is what the end of the world is like. Humans estranging themselves from their environment, including microbes, is the end of the world too. So why is making chicha important for the future?
I like this idea of creating cultures of cultures, and there's been so much of the discussion in the fermentation world of how much microbes shaped us and shaped our lives. And I find it fascinating, because this is a truly a community that is so in sync of what the rhythms of nature, the rhythms of the microbes, the rhythm, and working with them and preserving them. And that I find that it's a lot of it that exactly that is relevant in our day and age, in us, because we lost the wonder of being, and that's the thing, that welcoming this little bit of chaos of fermentation.
If you would like to learn more about the Guarani-Kaiowá and chicha making, please visit Paola's online webinars. You can find them on the Fermentation School. Actually, the chanting that opens this episode is a part of one of these fantastic webinars. All the revenue from the webinar goes directly to the people from Guarani-Kaiowá village. Spreading the awareness of their story and donations of money to support medical costs and basic needs are their requests. To be updated on the Guarani-Kaiowá situation, you can follow the Guarani Council on Instagram at Atiguasu, the Guarani Women's Council at Kunanguatiguasu, as well as Paula at getpickled.somerset, who was the guest of this episode of The World in a Pickle. I hope this episode of The World in a Pickle helps you co-feel with personal experiences of unrest. I hope fermented food helps you transform your prejudices, simplifications, and generalizations. I hope it also encourages you to integrate your personal experiences into the global happenings we are all part of in a smaller or bigger extent. If you like this episode, please share it. If you would like to know more about the show, listen to this episode again, or find previous episodes, please go to fermentradio.com. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. We would love to know what you think of this conversation, hear your human microbial stories, and your suggestions for future episodes. We are always looking forward to hearing from you at hello@fermentradio.com. You can also leave us an audio message on Instagram. The World in a Pickle is supported by the Kone Foundation and the Center for the Social Study of Microbes at the University of Helsinki, and is brought to you by Super Eclectic. I'm grateful for this support, and most of all, for all our amazing Ferment Radio listeners. I am your host Aga Pokrywka. Keep fermenting and stay tuned for the next episode of Ferment Radio.